Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. New York, a Saturday afternoon. The golden rays of the May sun filtered through the buildings of Manhattan, caressing the glass facades and cobblestone sidewalks of the Upper East Side. It was one of those New York days when the city seemed to exude luxury, precision, and power. Limousines parked in front of mansions, Hermes bags carelessly balanced on the crook of elbows, and designer glasses masking haughty glances, composed the daily ballet of a world as closed as it was noisy with appearances. It was in this setting that Elysian Grove, a Michelin-starred restaurant, stood, a discreet refuge for corporate lawyers, diplomats, wealthy heirs, and fashionable investors. Inside, everything was perfection. The crisply pressed white tablecloths, the bouquets of fresh peonies in the center of each table, the silver cutlery glittering beneath the bohemian crystal chandeliers. The room, bathed in soft classical music, exuded restraint, elegance, and a carefully maintained social conformity. That's when she walked in. Danielle Miller, a black woman in her 30s, with a simple, luminous beauty. Her white silk dress fell gracefully over her hips, reflecting the light like a tranquil waterfall. Every step she took was measured, assured, not to attract attention, but simply because she knew who she was. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, revealing the delicate line of her neck. Her makeup was understated and perfectly balanced, and her jewelry, a pair of pearl earrings and a slim watch, added a touch of refinement to her already elegant figure. Danielle wasn't just well-dressed. She embodied quiet success, the kind you don't shout from the rooftops, but one that commands respect without needing to say a word. A molecular biology researcher and professor at Columbia University, she was the product of years of hard work, of nights spent studying while others doubted her, of scholarships obtained through merit, and of a will forged in the silence of libraries and the muffled sounds of laboratories. Today, she wasn't there for a business meeting. She was there to celebrate a personal milestone, the publication of her latest article in a prestigious international scientific journal. A feat, and Jonathan, her husband, was due to join her any minute. A tech entrepreneur and founder of a fast-growing company, he had just returned from a trip to Europe. Despite his demanding career, he never forgot to show Danielle how much he respected, loved, and admired her. Danielle was shown to her table, the one she had reserved, near the large bay window. From there, she could watch the street, the elegant passers-by, the yellow taxis, and the world go by, while she savored a rare moment of tranquility. A waiter with a fixed face asked him politely, "Would you like to start with an aperitif, madam? An iced tea, no sugar, please." She picked up the menu, but didn't read it right away. She held it between her fingertips, her mind elsewhere, watching the dancing shadows of the trees through the window. She took a deep breath, enjoying the calm of this moment she'd been waiting for all week. But very quickly, the atmosphere became troubled. 3 tables away, a group of white women in their 40s glared pointedly in his direction. One of them, Kelsey Whitmore, had perfectly straightened blonde hair, wore a beige Chanel suit and heels that looked as if they'd never touched the pavement. She came from the old New York bourgeoisie, the kind that still considered certain people acceptable only in kitchens or behind counters. Kelsey frowned, then tilted her head toward her 2 friends and whispered, a sneer on her lips, "Did you see that? It seems like they let anyone in now. It's not what it used to be here." The 2 women laughed softly, a dry chuckle hidden behind their glasses of white wine. It wasn't surprise on their faces, but disgust. A lone, well-dressed black woman, sitting as their equal? It disrupted their worldview. Danielle heard every word. She could have turned around, retorted, humiliated them with a well-placed phrase. But she didn't. She stood straight. Her gaze rested calmly on the menu. She turned a page slowly, as if nothing had troubled her. But inside her, a cold tension was settling. It wasn't the first time. She knew that, for some people, the color of her skin was enough to invalidate everything she had accomplished. But she had learned, from childhood, that her mere existence, in certain places, was an act of resistance. And that day, like so many others, Danielle decided to stay. Not to prove anything to them, but because she had nothing to prove to anyone. A few minutes later, as the hushed murmur of conversation resumed in the room, a tension still hung in the air. Danielle calmly leafed through the menu, though she was no longer really reading the dishes. She felt the weight of stares, the icy coldness of veiled hostility. But she held firm. Her back remained straight. Her movements remained slow and elegant. She was waiting for Jonathan. That's when Kelsey Whitmore stood up. With a slow, almost ceremonial step, she left her table, a glass in hand. A Coca-Cola, ice cold, filled to the brim, the ice cubes gently clinking against the glass. Her heels clicked softly on the restaurant's polished parquet floor. Her two friends watched her, amused, silent accomplices in a scene whose outcome they could guess. Every step seemed choreographed. Kelsey approached Danielle, her gaze still hard, but her smile carefully polished. When she reached a meter from the table, she feigned surprise. A slight swerve of her leg, a twist of her wrist, and the glass tipped over. Deliberately. The Coca-Cola splattered against Danielle's chest, splashing her pristine white dress, the dark liquid trickling down the silk, tracing a dark line like an open wound. The fabric felt heavy, sticking to her skin. The stain was violent, undeniable, premeditated. A brutal silence fell over the room. Conversations stopped abruptly. Glasses hung from their lips. Eyes turned toward the stage as if frozen in marble. The waiters froze, hesitant. The shock wasn't in the gesture. It was in the audacity of the cruelty in broad daylight, in this place supposed to be the height of refinement. Kelsey raised a hand to her mouth, theatrical, feigning dismay. "Oh my God, I'm so clumsy, sorry." But her smile betrayed everything. It was a sneer of contempt hidden behind a mask of false innocence. She was a bad actor, but she knew she could afford to be. Here she belonged. She was at home. Danielle looked down at her dress, then slowly looked back up at Kelsey. She stood up, slowly, with implacable grace. She didn't scream. She didn't throw a glass back. She didn't cry. Her anger wasn't displayed. She stood in front of Kelsey, her shoulders straight, her voice calm, too calm not to shake the aggressor. "You didn't trip. You aimed at me. And you know why." Her voice, surgically precise, cut the room in two. Kelsey opened her mouth, but no words came out. The witnesses held their breath. They knew. They had seen. But social order quickly regained its rights. A young, visibly uncomfortable waiter approached, holding a napkin, which he extended to Danielle with his fingertips. His voice was low and trembling. "Madam, please, try not to make a fuss." Another looked away. He put back a chair that hadn't moved. Avoidance became complicity, and that's when Richard Green, the restaurant manager, appeared. Well-tailored suit, matching tie, conciliatory gait. He approached Danielle, never meeting her gaze. He kept his eyes lowered to the task at hand. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but his words chilled. "Perhaps it would be better for everyone if you left, madam. We can offer you a takeaway meal, of course. I'm sure it was just an accident, you understand." Danielle stared at him. For a long time. She wasn't just shocked by the manager's words. She was struck by the institutional cowardice, by the speed with which this man, a representative of a so-called civilized place, sacrificed her so as not to disturb the peace of the powerful. Like so many others before him, she still didn't scream. She took a slow breath. Then she dried her hands with the napkin she'd been given. She grabbed her bag. With a simple gesture, she pulled her chair out from under the table, and she left the restaurant. But every step she took toward the exit, every meter she covered, was an act of dignity. She hadn't said anything else, but she had said it all. An hour later, the sun was slowly setting over the city, casting a golden light on the elegant facade of Elysian Grove. The terrace was buzzing with worldly conversation again, as if nothing had happened. As if a woman's humiliation could be absorbed by the velvet of the seats and the gleam of the silver cutlery. Just then, a black luxury car pulled up in front of the entrance. A sedan with sleek yet imposing lines. The doorman, seeing the diplomatic plates, quickly opened the door. A man got out. Jonathan Miller. Tall, slender, perfectly tailored dark suit, hard gaze. He wore no ostentatious signs of power, and yet everything about him exuded it. He moved calmly, with authority. Not an aggressive authority, an unquestionable authority, the kind you don't question. He pushed open the restaurant door. The faint chime of the doorbell seemed to suspend time. Conversations instinctively stopped. The atmosphere changed. One could sense that something was brewing. Jonathan didn't shout. He He showed no apparent anger. He approached the reception desk, stared at a young waitress, visibly uncomfortable, who stammered, Sir, do you have a reservation? Jonathan answered calmly, in a calm but firm voice. Call your manager. Immediately, the waitress nodded, her hands trembling slightly, and slipped away. A few seconds later, Richard Green appeared, a tight smile on his lips, nervously wiping his hands on a towel. But when he saw Jonathan, his face fell. Jonathan walked forward with measured steps, without detour, straight toward him. He stopped 2 meters away. Then he spoke, in a calm, razor-sharp voice. My name is Jonathan Miller. I'm the principal shareholder of the management company that owns this restaurant. I'm the one who decides whether or not to renew your contracts. Management contracts. Management contracts. Service contracts. The manager's face lost all color. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Mr. Miller, I didn't know that. I mean, it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But Jonathan cut him off, without raising his voice. You watched my wife, a black woman, being deliberately humiliated. You saw the Coke drip onto her dress. You heard her words. And your response was to ask her to leave, to preserve the comfort of those who had hurt her. A deathly silence fell. This time, it wasn't embarrassment. It was fear and shame. Customers paused. Forks stopped halfway to their plates. Staff stared at their shoes. And at the back of the room, Kelsey Whitmore, sitting like a disgraced queen, finally looked down. Her confidence had melted. She was nothing more than an empty mask. Jonathan slowly turned his head towards her. Then he spoke, in an even colder voice. And you, madam. He looked at her without blinking. You are no longer welcome in any establishment of our group. A formal ban letter will be sent to you. Your name will be blacklisted from all our establishments. Kelsey, pale, opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jonathan then took out his phone. He dialed a number. Samantha, activate the replacement protocol. Richard Green is relieved of his duties effective immediately. Dissolution of the management team. Suspension of partnerships with suppliers associated with this establishment until further notice. A pause. Then, more quietly. And make sure Danielle gets a formal apology, a new dress, and a private invitation to our annual gala. Yes, in her honor. He hung up. Before turning on his heel, Jonathan turned back to the entire room. His gaze swept over each face. He wasn't angry. He was clear-headed, uncompromising, and deeply hurt. He declared, in a clear, slow, almost solemn voice. Let me be very clear. Luxury does not belong to a color. It does not belong to a class. It belongs to those who live with respect, with dignity, with heart. To those who understand that true greatness is not measured by the shade of the skin, but by the depth of the soul. And he went out. He didn't slam the door. He let the silence behind him do the work. A few weeks later, a letter arrives at Danielle's house. The envelope is thick, cream-colored, and elegant. The handwriting is neat. The sender's name makes her hesitate. Kelsey Whitmore. Danielle stands still for a moment, holding the letter in her hands. She turns it over, looks at it, almost feels it. Then she opens it, slowly, without haste, like confronting a ghost that returns, not to haunt, but to explain. Inside, several handwritten pages. The tone is different, humble, broken. Kelsey, and talk about haunt. Of knowing silences, of false smiles that she herself no longer understands. She speaks of the shock she felt that day when she saw Jonathan say those words, while no one was shouting. She writes that she realized, too late, that his cruelty was a cry of fear. Fear of losing what she thought she possessed, a place, a superiority, an illusion. She asks for forgiveness, not to erase, not to be excused, but to remind herself that she didn't have to be the aggressor. Danielle reads everything. Once, then puts the letter away. She doesn't answer. She doesn't need revenge. Revenge is a voice that screams. She chose the voice that stands tall. Because that day, in a luxurious Manhattan restaurant, a black woman, standing in her soiled white dress, didn't scream. She didn't beg. She looked her opponent in the eye. And she told the truth, without trembling. And this truth, carried by dignity, was enough to make masks fall, to shake an empire of appearances. She continues to teach. Every morning, she enters her classroom with the same grace. She inspires. She uplifts. She guides. without noise, without easy glory. Her students listened to her as one listens to a quiet force, because they sense that within her resides something that no one can buy: inner sovereignty. She doesn't try to fix what others have broken. She builds elsewhere, better, deeply. She knows that on that day, in that Manhattan restaurant, a black woman in a white dress stood up to hatred. And that power, real power, didn't reside in a spilled glass of Coke, nor in judgmental looks, nor in bank accounts or reserved seats. The real power was in his posture, in this silence that has not lowered its head, in this response which was a presence, and in the man who loved her deeply enough that, on that day, the world finally listened. And so Danielle moves forward, always straight, always worthy, quietly, but with everything needed to shake the walls of contempt, the strength to remain whole.